Hello, my name is Carl Pritzkat, and I'm the president of BookLife and the chief operating officer of Publishers Weekly. On behalf of everyone at BookLife and Publishers Weekly, as well as our colleagues at BookBaby, I want to welcome you to today's webinar, The Power of Book Cover Design to Attract Your Target Audience. Our goal today is to help you craft a standout book cover that captures attention and drives sales. Plus, we're going to look at real-world case studies. But before we start, I'd like to review some housekeeping that will make the webinar more useful for everyone. First off, we are recording today's webinar, so if you miss any part of it or you want to refer to it later, we will email everyone who registered the link in the next few days. The chat will be turned on throughout the webinar, and we invite you to communicate with your fellow attendees in the chat. You can access the chat window by clicking the chat icon at the bottom of the screen. We've scheduled 10 minutes or so at the end of the webinar for your questions. To ask questions, please use the Q&A window, which you can access by clicking the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Again, it's down there on the bottom of the screen. The Q&A window is the way for you to upvote other questions you'd like to have answered. So before you type in your question, check that someone else hasn't already asked it. If they have, you can upvote it. We will not be selecting questions from the chat window. The chat window is for chatting with fellow attendees, and the Q&A window is for asking questions. And finally, we ask everyone to use common sense and good manners when interacting with other attendees. Anyone who doesn't will be removed. With all of that said and out of the way, let's start our webinar, The Power of Book Cover Design to Attract Your Target Audience. Who better to lead us than BookBaby's Becky Rodriguez-Smith? Becky is a veteran graphic designer with over 20 years of experience in the industry. Throughout her career, she has helped thousands of independent musicians and authors bring their creative visions to life. As the director of design services at BookBaby, she combines her passion for artistic problem solving with mentoring her team, nurturing their growth as skilled design professionals, and ensuring every project is transformed into a visually stunning published book. Becky, take it away.
Thanks, Carl, and thank you for that kind introduction. Hello, everyone. I am going to go ahead and share my screen so we can jump right in. Okay. Let me move some things around. Great. Okay, so today we are going to explore the power of cover design, specifically how smart choices in typography, imagery, and genre awareness can help attract your target audience and set the tone for the reading experience. Now, you're going to notice the way a professional book designer approaches a cover is quite different from how an author might. Now, you as authors are deeply connected to the story and the characters that you've created, rightfully so. But because of that, you may be thinking, how can I best summarize my story? Now, a designer is going to think about a cover as a product. How can I make it stand out on a shelf or at a thumbnail size? How can I make it compete visually in its genre? Or how can I make it communicate well at a glance? Basically, it's the designer's job to translate the essence of the story into a compelling visual and have it speak directly to the target reader. So today, the goal is not only to show you what makes a cover beautiful, but what's going to make it effective. So I'm going to do that by going over some of the more important elements of design while mixing in some design critique before and afters, just to show you how I would apply those principles on real-world examples, which were graciously submitted for the purpose of this presentation. So if you happen to see your cover during the webinar, thank you for sending it to us. All right, let's get into it. So first, we're going to talk typography. Typography refers to the treatment of the text in an effort to make it visually pleasing. From choosing the font, choosing the size of the text, placement of the text, all of that is typography. But before you make those choices, you'll want to keep a few things in mind. So first, it's going to be your genre and your audience. Typefaces should feel like they're on trend with your genre. So as you do research, you'll want to take note of the types of fonts that are typically used, and that will help you narrow down your choices. Now, your type should also be audience friendly. For example, if you are targeting adult readers, you have a broader range of fonts you could choose from: decorative fonts, display fonts, script fonts. But if you are targeting child readers, you may want to stick to some fonts that are a little bit more traditional so that they can read them a little bit easier. Speaking of readability, that is super, super, super important and crucial to the memorability of your cover. Now, you want to try to avoid obscuring your text to the point that makes it illegible. But here's the thing: artwork overlapping or interacting with the text, totally fine. And actually, it adds a little bit of visual interest. You just don't want your audience struggling to find the title. Now, you're going to hear me use the term thumbnail a lot. This refers to the smaller size at which your cover will appear in an online retail setting. Now, when thinking of readability, it's good to keep that size in mind because if at all possible, you want your text to still be legible at that smaller scale. And then finally, hierarchy. So this is another thing that's going to come up often. Hierarchy refers to how you arrange the text, essentially the order of how you want the information to be received. What do you want them to read first, second, third, and so on? It's going to help you organize the information on the page so that your audience doesn't feel like they're being hit with a whole bunch of text all at once. And in doing this, it's going to help your reader digest the information, the most important information first, which will then help the chances of retention of that information. So to help you understand the benefits of hierarchy a little bit better, I wanted to try something. A book cover typically has, on average, about 3 to 4 seconds to make an impression. So that's, walking through a bookstore or scrolling through an online retail gallery. So I'm going to put a couple things on screen for a few seconds just to see what kind of impression they make on you. Ready? Okay, so feel free to share your reactions in the comments with the other attendees. But I'm curious, which section of text caught your eye first? Were you able to retain any of the text in that short amount of time? Now, did you try to read the text on the left and kind of noticed your eye was sort of like unconsciously drifting toward the right? So as those responses come in, I want to go over a couple of the differences. And I'll go ahead and bring those back up for you. So the right text, the title, this block of text, is large and bold. It's definitely going to pop out, right? It's followed by the less important text, which has been reduced in size, given a color change. There's some italic in there, an indent. The main goal is to try your best to make the most important information pop out first for your audience. Now, the text on the left feels a little bit like a wall of text, right? It's all the same, excuse me, the same font, the same size, the same color. It's all evenly spaced out. And hey, if you're like me, you may have even had to throw your glasses on to read it. No judgment. I would have had to do the same thing. But even that little bit of time lost in putting glasses on could cost you someone making enough contact with your cover to retain any of the information. So that's really why we put such emphasis on hierarchy and the power its application can have on the memorability of your book. Now, just one more note before we move on. Sometimes it may not be enough just to change the size of the less important text. So if you see here, we have the same arrangement of text on the left and right, but the text on the left has now been given all the same blue. All of a sudden, that title doesn't pop as much as it does on the right. And the smaller text isn't as easy to read through because we don't have those visual cues to differentiate and break up the text anymore. So when applying hierarchy, it's important to consider all aspects of type, and that's the font, the size, the color, the weight, and the style. Okay, so let's jump into our first critique just to see how these principles can be applied. So here we have a middle grade fiction book about a group of naval mice who face some unexpected challenges in their journey to graduate and earn their wings. So this sounds like a fun adventure book for middle schoolers. But right off the bat, I had some trouble reading the title. I actually had some trouble finding the title, especially at that thumbnail size. The text almost disappears. The white text over the sea of white caps, it's making it hard to see the edges of the letter forms, which is really hurting readability. In fact, I focus more on the illustration first, and if I only have a few seconds, the opportunity to commit that title to memory would be lost. As for hierarchy, the text is all white, and the size of the author name and the subtitle are pretty close. So besides some sizing of the title, there's some room here to apply some hierarchy techniques to elevate the type a little bit. Now, fun fact, did you know that the eye is naturally drawn to the center of an art piece? So the center is just a natural focal point when looking at a piece of art. And on this cover, there's not much going on in that center point. So I think that's something that we could improve upon just to make sure that the entire cover is engaging and there aren't any what we would call like dead spots on the cover. Okay, so let's check out the after. All right, so here's how I would elevate this cover, just to better fit the age group. First, I zoomed in on the illustration. Doing this pulls in the reader, and I think that's important for this intended age group. By zooming in, the middle schoolers are going to picture themselves kind of within this celebration rather than feeling like they're on the outside looking in. Then to help with the text, I used a gold accent color from the uniforms, and I removed some of the hats so that the majority of the text is over this flat navy background color. Now, I did place some of the hats back in sort of strategically, slightly overlapping some of the text. And what this does is it creates depth by making it feel like the title is kind of floating among the hats. And, you know, it's more playful. I think that would work well within the age group. And then finally, to help fill that center void we discussed, I set the subtitle in an italic serif font, reduced the size a little bit, and arranged it in this sort of cascading down effect. This gives a different treatment. It fills the spot, and it also helps to carry your eye from the title down to the illustration and down to the author name and the illustrator name, which, since I was able to fade the bottom of the cover to white, it gave me the opportunity to incorporate some more of those accent colors, just to help with the hierarchy levels again. So let's check out a side by side. So yeah, I think the most impact is definitely in those thumbnail sizes. How much more clear and readable that text is, even at that smaller scale. And you can also see that I added a little bit of breathing room around the text. So in the original version, the title and the author name, illustrator name were really butting up against the edge. So adding space around the text helps with the readability, and it just makes it feel a little bit less squeezed in. All right, let's check out another submission and talk more about typography. So this is a young adult fiction book about two teens who feel like they don't fit in. They each have their ailments they're struggling with that make them feel a little bit separated, but they find friendship in each other through a mutual discovery and learn how to stand up for themselves. So I think there's some really nice elements happening on this cover. I think the floral border juxtaposed the rigid gold vines, I think does a great job of hinting at the idea of someone not fitting in, not feeling like they're the opposite of those around them. So kind of like the soft florals against the rigid gold vines. And I think the type treatment is quite lovely as well, especially for this young adult fiction audience. The gold embossed, the swirly type, the little spots of reflection, quite beautiful. And actually, I think the title could even be pushed further size-wise. I love a good text-only moment on a cover, and I think this text treatment is worth showing off. I do see that part of the struggle may have been that last word, outsiderness. It's quite long, but I think because it's hyphenated, we've got a little bit of an opening to address that. Now, where I think the book cover could use a little bit more boost, typography-wise, is on the back cover. So now in comparison to the cover, the back feels like not as much attention was given. It's a wall of very similar text, very similar color, evenly spaced out, which, you know, we all know from our hierarchy experiment isn't the best solution. So I think we can call out some text and, I don't know, maybe incorporate some accent colors or some kind of elements just to make it feel more interesting. Now, did you know that a compelling tagline can help convey the book's tone in only a few words? And your back cover, like your front cover, is another marketing tool. So the idea is you lure them in with your front cover and you make the sale with the back cover. So I think the use of a clever hook could really do this book cover some good. All right, so first let's check out the front cover change. Subtle but impactful, right? So like I said, I zoomed in on that text. I separated ness from outsider. I don't think it affects the readability. Those syllables were already meant to be separated. But it helps give me the opportunity to increase the size and make the title the focal point of this cover. And then I just use some accent colors from the florals to lessen the emphasis on the author names and that little novel line at the top. And yeah, overall, fairly minimal adjustments, but I think the results are fabulous. And even at that thumbnail size, you could see how much more eye-catching that title really is. So let's check out the back cover. Now this back cover feels just as important. So after reading through the synopsis on the back cover, I realized that the last paragraph kind of perfectly summarized the book. It read, heartbreaking and hopeful, Some Species of Outsiderness is a story about two broken teens finding strength in each other, standing up when it matters most, and learning that sometimes being an outsider means you're the only one brave enough to face the truth. That paragraph absolutely needed to be called out. And after reading the rest of the text, it didn't seem like I was interrupting the flow. It wouldn't be affected if I moved that last paragraph to the top. So I did that. I used an accent font, an accent color, and the first few words of that paragraph, heartbreaking and hopeful, what an emotional, engaging hook. I read that and I instantly knew the tone of the book. So gave that first billing, centered, used a font kind of similar to the cover font, used an accent color as well. Yeah, and now the entire cover feels like a cohesive package design that's sure to lure in any young adult reader. So you can really see how some thoughtful typography can really elevate a cover solution. Okay, that's enough typography talk. Let's move into image choice. So the right image can do a lot for your book cover beyond just making it look good. It's going to set the tone of your book by evoking whatever emotion it is you want to communicate. Picking genre-fitting images will help draw in your intended audience. And most importantly, a powerful image is going to help create a lasting impression. So let's jump right into the critique. So here we have a memoir for adult readers, a brief excerpt. A compassionate mosaic memoir, The View from the Clinic, shares the experiences of patients, families, and staff inside a clinic from the eyes and heart of a nurse who worked there. So it sounds like this memoir is going to pull at the heartstrings a little bit as you read about the experiences of these patients and the nurse. So with that in mind, I'm not sure if the current imagery is the best choice. It feels a little clinical. And here's the thing, you never want to misread your readers with imagery, especially when thinking in terms of, a quick glance, those few seconds you have to make an impression. This could be mistaken for a medical book, for example. So as for the text, we have all white text here, which isn't too engaging. And there were some shadowing techniques to help the readability over that mosaic texture. I don't think we really need that. I understand why the author did it, thinking the multiple stories kind of coming together into this one book, but I don't think it's doing anything for the clarity of the image. And that rectangular shape underneath the author's name, because it's such an angular, kind of dark area, it's sort of pulling focus away from the title. Now, did you know cropping choices can affect the overall feel of the design? Now, a lot of this is going to be like unconscious kind of feelings or reactions. The brain is sort of hardwired to find balance in an image. So when an image is not quite equally centered on a page, your audience is going to notice, and it's going to kind of give off this feeling of it being unfinished. Secondly, and this is something that we learn in art school, is that you want to avoid cropping an image of a person at a joint where it could suggest that a limb could be missing. Now, hear me out. I know that none of you may have thought, oh my goodness, the nurse's head is missing. But unconsciously, it could add a sense of unnecessary tension. You may be thinking, I don't know, there's something a little bit off about the cover, and it very well could be the cropping choice. So if this image, for example, was evenly centered, and if maybe it was cropped just above the chin, so you kind of see the hint of the face, or at the shoulder line, it would ease that unwanted feeling of tension and make the image feel like the cropping was done intentionally and not rushed or feeling unfinished. Okay, so let's take a look at the image I think would work a little bit better. All right, so the buzzwords that I retained when reading the synopsis were patients and staff, compassionate, and from the heart. So it was important to me that I set the mood that this book contains emotional accounts of this type of care and not just a bunch of medical information. So I felt an image of the hands in this position were very comforting. And the gloved versus non-gloved hands kind of touches on that patient to medical staff relationship. And yeah, I just think that evoking that state of comfort would help the cover resonate with the audience interested in this subject matter. And also note that the hands are not cropped at the wrist. There's a little bit more of the arm showing just to kind of avoid that awkward cropping. Now, as for the text, I removed the mosaic texture. Like I mentioned, that wasn't anything that was really, really needed. And I introduced a script font. So I felt that did a nice job of representing the sort of like handwritten personal stories nature of a memoir. And then for color, I stuck with that bluish green color. I think we all kind of associate that with medical scrubs or the medical field. But I added this muted kind of purple color because that color is often associated with a feeling of empathy. So then a nice side by side. So yeah, I think you could definitely get a sense of how the images differ in regard to the overall mood they give off. I think at a glance, the vibe that I get from the original cover was more how I fixed my patients versus the redesigned cover, which is more how I comforted my patients. So big difference and can definitely make an impact on how this book is received by the intended audience. All right, we're moving along. We got one more topic to cover, and that is the genre. So you should absolutely research your genre before settling on an image and font choice. I'm going to say that one more time just to make sure we retain that bit of information. You absolutely want to research your genre before settling on image and font choices. Because even though you want your book to stand out, right? You want it to stand out for the right reasons. And having a book cover that looks like it's in the wrong genre, not a good reason. It's also important to understand that when you're marketing a book toward a specific genre and that audience, there's a good chance that that audience has already made a connection with certain types of book covers found in that genre. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Okay, so here we have a young adult sci-fi fantasy book, which is about a female character who finds out that she's been kept in the dark, lied to most of her life. Her childhood home has been destroyed, and she may have the power within her to save the world. So it sounds like a cool, young, sci-fi fantasy kind of read. Now, the interesting thing about YA readers, specifically in the sci-fi fantasy genre, is that they are drawn to covers that feature a strong protagonist. So while I believe that this symbol is absolutely relevant to the storyline, I think some type of image of a character would be more effective. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to nix the symbol altogether, but just maybe consider a less prominent way to feature it. Now, I'm going to squeeze in one more fun fact in here. Color choice can signal the genre, mood, and weigh in on how eye-catching the overall cover will be. So for example, here, this genre tends to use very high contrast, bold colors. Typically, they echo the survival, rebellion, adventure type of plot lines. So I'm not sure that this kind of purplish blue with accents of yellow and white and gray. I'm not sure this is the best choice for this book genre. To me, they kind of say more informative content than they do fantasy sci-fi. And then lastly, the fonts I think could be a little bit more exciting. Maybe we'll explore some treatments to kind of help it pop off the page. All right, let's check out the redesign. Big difference, right? And feel free to share your reactions in the comments because this is a kind of a 180. We have now a powerful representation of this main character that immediately draws you in. She's pretty silhouetted as far as her coloring goes. You don't really see a lot of details on her face. It adds a little bit of mystery. And to be honest, I like when I can kind of invent the character in my head just by reading the descriptions in the text. So I think having her be mostly shaded is Not a bad idea. But also it kind of symbolizes, it sort of captures the idea that this character was kept in the dark and lied to for most of her life. So there's a fun bonus symbolism there. And then behind her, we have an image of destruction. You know, her home has been destroyed, and like overall, her life is falling apart. Um, and then we have all of that set in this very cinematic, rich, high contrast color scheme, very trendy and very attention grabbing. And then to bring it all together, I have the title in this bright white, combined with this sort of like electric blue glow. I thought that felt very like futuristic or supernatural, which kind of worked with the content. And yeah, and then I found this cool decorative font that felt very sci-fi to me. And the A's happened to not have the cross going through them, which kind of worked perfectly with the symbol. So I swapped out the symbol, I swapped out the A for the symbol in extant. And yeah, it gave me the opportunity to include the symbol still, but just not as the most prominent imagery. All right, so let's look at the side by side of the before and after. So yeah, I think overall coloring, the character, the typeface, everything feels more on brand with this genre. And looking at the thumbnail, I think the text pops. Even at that small size, you can see the silhouetted character, which I think will definitely appeal to those YA fantasy readers. All right, let's check out one more cover. So here we have a self-help book for adults. A brief synopsis: take charge of your future and craft the life you've always dreamt of, one day at a time. Build a better day for success supports your personal growth journey by encouraging mindset shifts and the active pursuit of dreams. So essentially, this book is going to be sharing some tips, help to guide the reader to achieving their personal goals. Very, very encouraging, very inspiring, right? Now, when I look at this cover, I'm not quite sure I'm feeling that. The color scheme to me isn't giving off those positive emotions. In fact, the blues and the blacks can kind of be associated with sadness, which isn't the vibe we want to give off at all with this cover. So I think some bright colors would help to evoke that confidence boosting theme. And actually, after researching the genre, which we should all do, right? I came across several bold and high contrast color schemes. So I think a bright color palette for this cover would definitely fit in the genre. The other thing I discovered was that according to some industry data, the genre is dominated by 25 to 40 age group, with emerging readers in the 18 to 24 age group. You figure those are the high schoolers and the college students all kind of getting out of school and seeking that direction. So this tells me that we definitely want to go with a more contemporary solution, something that is going to help appeal to that younger end of the demographic, knowing that the readers in that age group are rising. As for the text, there's kind of a lot of text on here. Now, I understand with this book genre, it's not uncommon to see bits of text that are going to kind of hint at some of those positive changes you're going to have after reading the book. But having a lot of text on the cover can feel a little cluttered, which isn't a feeling we want to be felt. We want to be feeling for a book that is meant to inspire positive change. Also, as you can see in these genre samples, I see a lot of big, bold, all caps typography. And that seems to be like the style trend for this genre, as opposed to the upper and lower case, which is being used on the original cover. And for our fun fact, did you know consistency is key when it comes to the overall impact of your cover? So you want the vibe of your imagery to appeal to the audience you're trying to reach. Now, I think the choice to use the upward pointing arrow is a little overused as a representation of the ideas of personal growth and moving up towards success. Plus, I think there's just, I don't know, a little bit more current way to represent those concepts that would appeal a little bit better to that demographic. All right, let's check out our last after. Okay, I don't know about you, but I look at this cover and my spirits are instantly lifted. These bright and cheery colors are going to stand out in the genre gallery for the right reasons. And these little like contemporary simplified infographic type people are very trendy. And then the fact that they're climbing up ladders one step at a time and they're building or repairing the title, like they're literally improving the book, just like the book is promising to improve the reader. Very fresh, very modern way to allude to that topic. And then I thought it would be interesting to kind of split the cover in half with the color. I think it helps to allude to the like the concepts of change, like the before and the after. And then combining that with the all caps, big bold typeface, just like the samples we saw, with emphasis on better day, helps to make that text pop and push the ultimate goal of the book. So then let's look at a side by side. Definitely kind of night and day, right? Now, I did keep most of the text, just that far top line and the far bottom line I left off. I think those lines could work well as a hook on the back cover. Or if this is an ebook only, we could definitely include that information in the description on the online retail page. But again, thumbnail size, I think the title pops. It's much clearer, readable, definitely more memorable, and overall, I just think more effective. All right, so before we hop into some Q&A, I just want to end with a book cover isn't just decoration, right? It's absolutely a strategic marketing tool that is going to connect with your audience before they even pick up the book. So I think by carefully applying some of the principles that we went over, typography, making intentional image choices, and designing with the genre in mind, you won't just create a beautiful cover, you're going to create a product that stands out, that speaks to the right readers, and ultimately drives greater interest, engagement, and best of all, sales. And finally, as my last pearl of wisdom, you want to give your cover design the time it deserves to create. So after pouring months or years into your writing, I understand it's tempting to want to kind of rush to the finish line and get your book out. But your cover is going to be the first impression. So I would allow time for your for thoughtful design and refinement so that you end up with something that you're truly going to be proud to share. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing here.
Whoops. All right.
Hey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Becky. And again, I want to remind everybody that Becky is the Director of Design Services at BookBaby. And some people have asked if she's available to help out with their design services, which makes a lot of sense because that was a great presentation. And of course, Becky is with BookBaby, and BookBaby is definitely ready to help with design services. I want to introduce Dan Baker, who's the VP of Marketing for BookBaby, and Dan's going to help us go through some questions and answers here. So, Dan, lead us.
Will do. Thanks for all the great questions and everybody's participation. And just a reminder, we will be sending out a replay a couple days after the event. So if you missed any of it, don't worry, you'll get to see it in full. So Becky, first question I want to pose to you is, what about the design of the book spine, since a lot of books are stored with spine view? How would you address that?
Well, I think it matters on what's going on the cover, but if you're thinking in terms of, obviously the readability still pertains to the spine. On a more production point of view, I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing something completely different on your spine. Just with production, there's naturally always the chance of shift on press. So I would definitely try to think of something that's going to flow from the cover to the back cover. But other than that, I mean, the spine, as long as it's readable, I think that's the main goal that you want. And you want your title on there and you want your author name on there. You don't necessarily need to have a subtitle per se. I would say to keep your spine on the simpler side, just so that the main ideas pop off and you're not kind of overwhelming that with lots of little bits of information. Next question.
Terrific, thank you. So I'm getting some questions about the research aspect. So can you expand upon where we can research our genre? i.e., do we look at images from other successful books in the genre, film, TV? And how do you suggest researching colors and fonts?
So as far as genre, I mean, honestly, personally, when designing, I hit up Amazon. I'll go through and search by genre and look to see what's on there. That's kind of how I did it in the presentation. And then as far as well, I think in doing the genre research, you're going to see the themes happen. You're going to see the similar types of fonts. And it's not that you necessarily have to use the same exact font and you need to search and figure out what exactly that font is. It's more about the look of it. Is it a serif? Is it typically something that's a little bit more ornate? Like those types of overall themes are what you're going to want to pick up on. Same thing with color. You're going to see these themes of color happening. As far as the psychology behind color, that's something you can actually look up and see what kind of colors evoke what types of information or emotions, because that can absolutely help when creating a cover. But yeah, I mean, no real special like hidden secrets when it comes to the genre searching. I think it's just important to look up whatever genre you're planning your book to be lying within, and take some cues from the books around it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So for somebody who's looking to kind of do this on their own, what is the best low-cost software you would recommend?
So I feel like that's kind of a trick question. It's tough because honestly, the best software to use is going to be the Adobe Creative Suite. And I know that's not the most cost friendly, but it's going to give you all of the creative freedom that you need to really make your cover as unique as it can be. I know that there's things like Canva out there that seem to be popular because they are free to use, but there's only so much available on software like that. And I don't know, I feel like the less options you have, the higher the chances of your cover starting to look similar to someone else's. So yeah, I would have to stick to the Adobe Creative Suite as far as software for designing.
Okay. I know our first example was for middle school children, but do you have any advice or strategy suggestion for children's books, really from the ages of 3 to 7, for an even younger audience?
Or wait, for strategy? What was that?
What is your sort of design strategy for an even younger audience than the middle school example you showed us of earlier? What kind of emotions are you trying to evoke? The lettering, the scale, etc.
Okay. So as far as emotion goes, it all depends on what the content is about. But in general, when thinking of that younger, I guess sort of like preschool, pre-K, kindergarten, like those age ranges, I think the clearer the better. I wouldn't recommend overlapping text on imagery. Just so that the letter forms are easy to read and there isn't anything that's obscuring them. Now for inside, I know this is kind of a more of a cover discussion. I will mention that something you want to keep in mind is if you are intending for the book to be like a read aloud book for a librarian or for a teacher or something like that, that's something to keep in mind as far as the size of the text so that it's something that they can hold up and kind of read a little bit at a distance. But yeah, then as far as, I mean, most of the time you want to go for bright, cheery. I don't really anticipate there being many sadder children's books out there, but you never know. But yeah, that's a good rule of thumb to go for clear. You don't want to have a lot of imagery behind the text. You know, if you have illustrations, think of having the text be separated for the most part, doesn't have to be completely. And then when it comes to interior, you know, try to make sure that that text is clear, easy to read, and think larger when thinking read aloud.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I thought this next question was interesting. So, we're talking about researching genres and fonts and finding something that you like to be inspired by. Is there a simple way to identify a specific font that you can see on a cover? Like, is there a site that we can go to how do you identify a font you like, but you have no idea what it's called?
Yeah, so there's a site called What the Font. It's kind of a fun name. It's literally What the Font in all one word. And you are able to upload a screenshot of the text and it will walk you through. It usually has you select a portion of the text and then you can write what letters appear in that section. And then it'll give you a nice list of fonts that are similar and you know where you can find them, where you can purchase them. So yeah, that's a good tool to know. That was a good question.
Okay. And then some of the questions are a little bit more genre specific. So, someone asked, what is your opinion on four-edge painting or design on poetry books?
I'm not sure I know what that means for
Whoever asked that question, if you could clarify in the Q&A what that one for you. Okay. In the meantime, I thought this was an interesting one. Maybe this can help people start thinking about, okay, what does my book actually elicit? So somebody said, I saw a description on Barnes& and Noble the other day that it was a cozy fantasy, which actually was a good fit for my series. Any ideas about the direction I should take the design in based on such a description?
Ooh, that's tough to say. That's one of those categories that is pretty unique. I don't know. I would have to say like I would have to read the synopsis to really kind of get a feel for uh some direction to take a category like that in. But that's where, you know, the genre research and such would come in. But yeah, that's a tricky one to answer without really getting into the content.
Yeah, I think one thing that you made clear is a designer who has a better understanding of the book is going to do a better job understanding what the design of the cover should be and the emotions it needs to elicit. So, yeah, I was just curious how you would answer that. It is fairly vague, but I thought it could get an interesting response. So, the other two genres that come up quite a few times here are memoir and photography or coffee table books. So, we didn't do any specific critiques there, but do you have any advice for somebody doing a photography coffee table kind of book as far as what the cover should elicit, maybe the back cover, etc.?
Yeah. I mean, as far as the cover goes for an art book, a photography book, I mean, obviously I would suggest you want to highlight your photography, and your photography is going to be front and center. I think that's one of the rare exceptions where um a title and an artist name may not need to have the most emphasis. So I think that's something to keep in mind when it comes to art books, is that, they are the exception to the rule, really, because what you want people to notice first is the artwork, is the photography. Same with the back cover. I mean, if you maybe have a theme to the photography, maybe it's photography taken in a certain setting or a certain town, or whatever it is, and there's a story behind that. I think that's something you can absolutely include on the back cover, just to kind of give the viewer a sort of peek inside to where the mindset was when the photography was taken. But yeah, as far as cover, it's your photography is front and center, and I think you can go very minimal with title, if any, or author name, in this case photographer name.
Okay. So this one's about book series. And I think what they're asking is more in line of how far would you be comfortable diverting from the specific visual language of a specific genre, whether it be fantasy or romance. So in other words, how much do you want to stay in that lane? And then I think a follow-up question for that is, and when you're designing a series, right, how do you want to make sure that each cover is cohesive so that it feels like it's part of a series?
Yeah. So as far as sticking with the genre, I think those rules would still apply regardless if it's a series. But as far as keeping the consistency across the board, it really depends on what route you're taking. So if you're going the route of maybe having someone illustrate the covers, then that's information that's good for them to know up front. You wouldn't want them to create something and then surprise them, a year later, hey, I got another one for this title. Same with design. If you are in the process of creating a series, it's going to be a series, whether it's 2, 3, 4, however many books. When you are working with a designer, let them know that. You may not necessarily have the titles already worked out, but giving them the idea of, like, okay, here's where this character is right now. Here's kind of where I'm thinking this is going to go, just because that could have uh, an impact, and it could help them choose a direction. Maybe you were thinking of representing this character, and if they find out, well, wait, this is part of a series, is there something that is sort of unifying the series, or is there something that is introduced that's new in the series? Maybe it's top of my head, maybe it's a certain sword or a weapon or something, and then in the next series the weapon is some other element, and then maybe that becomes the unifying element across all the series. So I think giving the designer a heads up, or the illustrator, that it is a series, give them an idea of where the story is going to go, so that they can kind of work with you and develop something that will help keep them all unified.
Okay, we have time for one last question. I mentioned a couple people had asked about memoirs. The question was, what's the most appropriate type of image to use for a memoir? Is it a photo of somebody specific, somebody who wrote the book, or is it something else? So in your experience, what have you had the most success with in terms of memoir cover design?
Yeah. So it really depends. I mean, the memoir that I went over in the presentation was a little bit different, right? It was definitely someone's perspective, but there was subject matter there that made sense to highlight. But if we're talking traditional memoir, this is, the story of someone's life. Yeah, I've seen photos from, older photos from that person's past. I've seen images of maybe, of the town or whatever that they grew up in. It depends on what you feel was I don't know, like the most important part of that person's life. But I think overall, in general, using an image of that person, if it's someone who's maybe lived a nice long life, and they're in their senior years now, maybe something that's a little bit younger, something where maybe represents like the best time of their life, would be really nice to highlight on a cover. um and if you don't have imagery like that, then we can absolutely do something that's a little bit more, I don't want to say generic, because that has like a negative connotation, but something that's a little bit simpler. Maybe, if it's a memoir of letters that you've written back and forth, maybe somebody who was overseas and in the military or something, we can maybe highlight, the letters or something on the cover. So there's definitely room, to explore some different direction. But yeah, I think having a nice older photo of the person is probably the most successful.
Okay. Thank you, Becky. And thank you, everybody, for your questions as well. Sorry if we couldn't get to all of them, but again, we'll be following up with the webinar replay, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Dan, and the BookBaby team for putting this together. From all of us at BookBaby and BookLife and Publishers Weekly, we thank you all for being here. As Dan said, in the next few days, we'll send out a recording of the webinar, and so you can relive Becky's great advice on this. And definitely, if you have questions for Becky, you can reach out to her through BookBaby. And BookBaby does a great job in terms of cover design. So again, thank you all for joining us, and have great success with your books.
Good luck, everybody. Thanks, Carl.
Bye.
Bye.